Rise to speak on the Early Childhood Legislation Amendment, Child Safety Bill 2025, Social Services Regulation Amendment, Complaints and Worker Regulation Bill 2025. And from the outset of this, Acting Speaker, I know that across both sides of the aisle, we would both agree that this is the place, that the protection of children is one of the most important things that we can do as legislators. It's our duty as legislators. We would all agree to that. And that's why on our side, it is so mind-boggling to us that the government has allowed less than a day for the opposition to scrutinise the bill. If we are serious about our democracy and its functions, if we're serious about keeping children safe, then the government would have done its due diligence and allowed the opposition to have had the time to look at the bill, read its contents, examine it, go out to stakeholders, undergo the typical democratic process that our children deserve in order to be kept safe. But instead, what the government has done has given us less than a day to be able to then go through all of these changes. And as the opposition, our job is to scrutinise these bills so that we can have the best outcomes for Victorians, the best outcomes for our children, the best outcomes for those that we have the duty to keep safe in this place. And so with a day's notice to be able to go through all of these details, impossible to do. If the government was really serious about working together in a bipartisan way to keep children safe, then there wouldn't have been less than a day to have gone through all of this. And the truth is, we're here debating these 3 bills today, 3 bills altogether, 2 of them, which are these that I've held up, which we've had less than a day to see because the government has failed to act when it mattered. Our priority as legislators must be putting children first and keeping children safe, something that this government has failed to do, and now they're trying to pick up the pieces and introduce measures that should have been implemented years ago. No one disputes the importance of these reforms. Everyone remembers the case of Joshua Dale Brown, the childcare worker who sickeningly was charged with over 70 offences, including sexual misconduct and producing child abuse material. And indeed, parents across my community reached out to me, and in fact across the state, contacted me in grief and dismay. How could this have happened? How and why weren't our children protected? Why weren't they kept safe? And if the government knew, why didn't they act all those years ago? If the government knew, why didn't they do anything to keep our children safe? This is an issue of the case is too little, too late. The government has known for years that the system was broken and they did nothing. In 2022, the Commissioner for Children and Young People warned the government, and I quote, that children will be abused or continue to be abused by people who should have been stopped from working with children if more funding was not given to the very agency that investigated inappropriate behaviour in childcare centres. The Victorian Ombudsman warned the government in 2022 again that Victoria had the weakest working with children check system in the nation. The Ombudsman called for reforms and the government ignored every single recommendation. They have known about these weaknesses. They've known about these issues for 3 years plus, and the government were told exactly what would happen and exactly what they needed to do in order to do better to protect Victorian children, and they did nothing. They did nothing, Acting Speaker, and now the children of Victoria have had to pay the price.
Member to resume your seat.
Has to be factual. Even the member for Warrandyte, despite her TikTok and Instagram following, she has to be factual. And on this, in everything she said the last 2 minutes, literally I quote, "We have done nothing," is an outrageous lie. Outrageous lie. I wonder if that makes it, what I say makes it on her social media following.
Thank you. I rule on the point of order. There's no point of order, but I would like to ask member to come.
Acting Speaker. And to the point of parents across my community that have contacted me in grief and dismay, can I raise a story from a family that contacted my office who have asked me to raise it in the Parliament? And I wonder if the Minister at the table would allow for this to be read, because this is actually a truth from a family that has written to my office. Truth from a family who've asked me to raise this issue. And I would like to read this in the House. We saw, dear Ms Werner, we saw your Parliament speech about the childcare scandal and we need your help. We are another family. We are living proof that the government's failure to act in 2020 destroyed more children's lives. If the system had listened to Good Start's substantiated findings in 2020, if they'd done their job when the perpetrator was caught grooming and kissing toddlers, he would have never been able to have touched our children. This is not our fault, this is theirs. They speak of their child who was 3 years old, their other child who was 1 year old, and they say the system made a choice to provide our children to a predator they knew was dangerous, but we didn't know. Good Start knew, the police knew, the department knew, Working with Children Check knew. They all knew in 2020 and they let him keep working with children. And then they detail the changes that they saw in their children at the hands of this alleged perpetrator, with a 3-year-old becoming terrified of going to the bathroom alone, who then started to make sexual comments about using his mouth, who then tried to kiss with an open mouth, and their 1-year-old, barely walking, woke screaming, became clear, needed to be held constantly, with both children withdrawing into themselves. This family has asked me to raise this in our Parliament on behalf of them. And as of last week, when they wrote to me in August, they said, when the Premier called this unacceptable, this person still had his Working with Children check. 5 years, Ms Werner, 2020 to 25, how many families, they write to me. If they had acted on Good Start's report, none of us would be here, not us, not the 2023 family, not whoever else is out there. They wrote to me and said, we've spent thousands on therapy, we'll need years more. The government's response is not good enough. Ms Werner, you're not our local member, but you're the only one fighting for families like ours that we've seen. When we saw your speech, we felt seen for the first time. And they say, Good Start did their job. They caught him, fired him, reported him. If the system had done its job, our children would be safe. This is not our fault. The Premier says this is unacceptable. That word doesn't give us back our children's innocence. And I raise it in this place today because, again, in 2022, it was warned, the government was warned that children will be abused or continue to be abused by people who should have been stopped from working with children if more funding was not given to the agency who investigates inappropriate behaviour in childcare. We know that to be true. The Victorian Ombudsman, it is a publicly tabled report, warned the government in 2022 that Victoria had the weakest Working with Children check system in the nation. And while we welcome these reforms on this side of the House, what we do not welcome is the delay. What we do not welcome is the lack of transparency to read through a bill this size in less than a day. What we do not welcome is the failure to act to keep Victoria's children safe. This neglect has allowed child sex offenders to go from childcare to childcare, to continue abusing children, exactly what the Ombudsman told the government would happen years ago. But the government has delayed action time and time again, and the consequences have been sickening. Our children have paid the price. So today, while the government introduces these bills, I think back to July when they opposed our policy that we took to the floor of Parliament, where we called for, and they voted this down, allowing immediate action on credible information, linking the Working with Children check system to the Victoria Police database, maintaining suspensions during appeals, reducing Working with Children check validity from 5 years to 3, and mandating training in child safety, reporting obligations and abuse awareness. The government voted these changes down. They voted down this suite of reforms that would keep our children safe, not after a rapid review that didn't even get followed when it said it was going to be tabled in October. Here we are in November, not actually acting rapidly to keep our children safe. They voted that down, and now the government is finally taking action after ignoring warnings from the experts, ignoring cries of help from families like I have raised here today. And after initiating this not so rapid review, now they finally come to the floor, and so we will support these reforms, but they're too little too late.